I still remember the moment I realized something was off. I had been married to Claire for 8 years. We met in our mid-20s, built a life together, had dreams of traveling the world, starting a family, and growing old side by side. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect couple. We had matching smiles in all our photos, shared a close-knit group of friends, and had a solid routine. But beneath that surface, cracks had started to form, and I was too blind, or maybe too trusting, to see them. It all started 6 months ago when Claire became distant. She'd started working late more often, claiming she had new responsibilities after getting a promotion at work. I was happy for her at first, proud of her ambition, but over time I noticed subtle changes. She stopped asking me about my day. Intimacy between us became rare, and when we did spend time together, her eyes were glued to her phone. One night, curiosity got the better of me. Claire had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and while I was cleaning up after dinner, a text popped up on the screen. It was from someone named Mike. The message read, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." My heart froze. I told myself it had to be innocent. Maybe he was a coworker and they had a work event. Maybe last night meant something work-related. My mind was grasping for any explanation that didn't involve betrayal. I wanted to believe in her, in us. But deep down, a part of me already knew the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Claire lay next to me, her back turned, peacefully unaware of the storm that was brewing in my mind. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of suspicion pressing down on my chest like a vice. I had to know for sure. I wasn't the type to snoop, but I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I needed proof. The next day, I called out sick from work and hired a private investigator. I didn't know what else to do. Confronting Claire without evidence felt like an easy way for her to twist the story, make me doubt myself. And so I waited. A week later, the investigator handed me a file. Inside were pictures, clear, undeniable proof of her infidelity. Claire wasn't just working late. She was spending her evenings with Mike, a guy she had met at her gym. They were photographed leaving a hotel together, hand in hand, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. There was no mistaking the intimacy between them. The pain hit me like a punch to the gut. My world shattered in an instant. All the years we'd spent together, the plans, the memories, they all felt tainted, like everything had been a lie. I was furious, humiliated, and heartbroken all at once. When Claire came home that evening, I confronted her. I laid the photos on the table and watched as the color drained from her face. Her initial reaction was to deny it, of course, but the evidence was irrefutable. She eventually broke down, confessing to everything. Her excuses were pathetic. She blamed the distance between us, claimed that she had felt neglected, that I wasn't the same man she had married. But the truth was, she had chosen to betray me. She had made the decision to seek comfort in someone else rather than come to me with her problems. I packed my bags that night. I couldn't stay. I refused to live under the same roof as someone who had betrayed me so deeply. Claire cried and begged for me to stay, promised it would never happen again. But I was done. I told her we were over, that I would be filing for divorce. As I walked out the door, I thought that would be the end of it. I thought leaving her would be enough. But little did I know that was just the beginning. Leaving that night felt surreal. I expected to feel some kind of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But instead, I felt hollow. I had spent almost a decade with Claire, building a life I thought was solid. And now, in a matter of hours, it had all crumbled. I stayed at a friend's place that night, unable to go back to the house we had shared for so long. The next few days were a blur. I filed for divorce, packed up the essentials, and started looking for an apartment. Claire kept calling, texting, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and pleas to talk. Every time I saw her name flash on my screen, it felt like a fresh wound. I ignored her. I couldn't deal with her words, her fake remorse. The betrayal was too raw. But then, after about a week of silence, something changed. It was a Thursday afternoon when I received an unexpected knock on my friend's door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it and saw Claire standing there, I was caught off guard. She looked terrible. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She wasn't wearing her usual polished outfits either. She looked lost. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to slam the door in her face. The sight of her made my anger flare up again. The image of her with Mike seared into my mind. But something about the way she looked, so broken, made me hesitate. I stepped aside, letting her in. She stood awkwardly in the living room, glancing around like she didn't belong. And honestly, she didn't. This wasn't her space. She had no place in my life anymore. But here she was, invading it again. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't mean anything to you right now, but I am. I've ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but please, just hear me out." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall, keeping my distance. "You've got 5 minutes," I said coldly. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she might break down again, but she held it together and started talking. She told me about how things had started with Mike, how it had been innocent at first, just conversations at the gym, harmless flirting. But then it escalated, and before she knew it, she had crossed lines she could never uncross. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her eyes pleading. "I know that sounds like bullshit, but I wasn't thinking. I was lonely, and Mike gave me attention I felt like I wasn't getting from you. That hit a nerve." "So this is my fault?" I snapped. "I wasn't enough for you, so you just decided to fuck some guy from the gym? That's how you fix things?" "No," she cried. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I made a terrible mistake, and I know I can't take it back. But I miss you, Jake. I miss us. Please, just give me another chance." I shook my head, my anger bubbling to the surface. "There is no us anymore, Claire. You destroyed that the moment you slept with him. You don't get to come here and play the victim now. You had your chance, and you threw it away." She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. "I know I hurt you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I love you. I still love you, and I can't imagine my life without you. I'll do anything to make this right. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job if I have to, whatever it takes." Her desperation was palpable, but it only made me angrier. Where was this energy when she was sneaking around behind my back? Where was this determination to fix things when she was choosing Mike over me, over us? "I'm done, Claire," I said firmly. "There's nothing left to fix." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there watching her fall apart, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the betrayal. My sympathy evaporated as quickly as it had come. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "Please, just don't leave me." I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. "You already lost me," I said quietly before walking out of the room. I stayed outside for a while, letting the cold air hit my face. Claire was still inside, probably trying to figure out how to salvage what little dignity she had left. I didn't care. I had nothing left to give her. When I finally went back inside, Claire was gone. She had left without another word. I thought that would be the end of it, that she would finally understand there was no going back. But I was wrong. She wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. The following weeks were eerily quiet. I didn't hear from Claire for a while after that emotional encounter. At first, I thought she had finally accepted the reality that we were over. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings, found an apartment, and began adjusting to life on my own. There was a strange sense of peace in the solitude, even if it felt empty at times. But just when I started to think I was getting my life back on track, Claire reappeared, this time with a different tactic. One evening, I came home from work to find a letter waiting for me in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Claire's, and for a moment I considered throwing it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a long, handwritten note. Her words dripped with regret and longing, as if she had spent hours trying to craft the perfect apology. She wrote about how much she missed me, how every day apart from me felt like torture. She mentioned how hard she was working on herself, seeing a therapist to figure out why she had sabotaged our marriage. "I know I can't undo what I've done, Jake," she wrote, "but I need you to understand that I'm changing. I've realized how much I've hurt you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I can be the woman you fell in love with again. Please just give me one more chance." I crumpled the letter in my fist, frustrated at her relentless pursuit. I couldn't believe she still thought there was hope after everything. I had made my position clear. But as the days passed, more letters followed. Claire was persistent, almost obsessive. Each letter was longer, more emotional than the last, filled with desperate promises to win me back. She talked about our memories, about the good times we had, and how much she regretted ruining what we had built. And then she started showing up. At first, it was small things. Her car parked outside my new apartment building late at night, her figure in the distance when I left work. She wasn't confronting me directly, but she was always there, lingering in the background, waiting for me to notice. It started to freak me out. One evening, as I was coming home from the gym, I spotted her sitting in her car in the parking lot. I hadn't even gotten out of mine before she rushed over, knocking on my window. Reluctantly, I rolled it down just a crack. "Jake, please. I just want to talk," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "I have nothing to say to you, Claire," I replied flatly. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she clasped her hands together. "I can't lose you. I'm doing everything I can to be better. I'm going to therapy twice a week now. I've cut Mike out of my life completely. I haven't spoken to him since the day you left. Please, can't we at least try to fix this?" I sighed, leaning my head back against the seat. "There's nothing to fix, Claire. You made your choice, and I've made mine. It's over." "Is it really over? Is there no part of you that misses me?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "We had 8 years together, Jake. You can't just throw that all away like it meant nothing." I clenched the steering wheel, trying to hold back the flood of emotions her words triggered. She was right in one sense. Those 8 years did mean something. I hadn't thrown them away, she had. I had cherished those years, but they were tainted now. They weren't the same memories for me anymore. I couldn't look back on them without feeling the sting of her betrayal. "It's not that simple," I said finally. "What we had, it's gone, Claire. I can't just forgive you and pretend everything's fine." She reached through the crack in the window, gently placing her hand on my arm. "I know it'll take time. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but please don't shut me out completely. Let me prove to you that I've changed." I pulled my arm away and shook my head. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you anymore. It's about me. I deserve better than what you gave me." Claire's face twisted in pain, but I didn't have it in me to care anymore. I rolled up the window and drove off, leaving her standing in the parking lot, her silhouette shrinking in the rearview mirror. For the next few days, I tried to ignore her. She sent more letters, left more voicemails, but I refused to respond. I had thought that my silence would make her give up. Instead, it seemed to make her even more determined. Then one evening, I returned to my apartment to find her sitting on the stairs leading up to my front door. She wasn't crying this time. She didn't even look sad. There was a strange calmness in her expression, which only made me more uneasy. "Claire, what the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my patience running thin. She stood up slowly, dusting off her jeans. "I realized something, Jake," she said, her voice eerily steady. "We're meant to be together. I know you're angry, and I know you hate me right now. But deep down, I know you still love me. I can feel it." I frowned, stepping back slightly. "You need to leave. Now." She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto mine. "Number, I'm not going anywhere. You're just confused. You think you don't want me right now, but I know you. I know what we had was real, and I know you still feel it." This was new. This wasn't the crying, regretful Claire from before. This was someone different, someone who refused to accept reality. "I don't know what kind of delusion you're living in, but we're done. You need to move on." She didn't move. Her smile widened, and she reached out, touching my arm. "You'll see, Jake. You'll realize that we're meant to be together. And when you do, I'll be waiting." I stepped back again, this time with more force. "I'm serious, Claire. Leave, before I call the cops." Her smile faltered, but she didn't say anything. She simply nodded, turned around, and walked away. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As I watched her disappear into the night, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I thought that Claire's last visit was as unsettling as it could get, but I was wrong. Things escalated quickly after that night. I tried to keep my distance, hoping she'd eventually give up and move on. But Claire wasn't letting go, and her persistence turned into something darker. At first, it was little things. More letters, random messages that I ignored. Her car parked outside my building late at night. It felt like she was everywhere. Every time I stepped outside, there she was. Just far enough not to confront me, but close enough to remind me she was watching. It started to feel suffocating, like I couldn't escape her no matter where I went. One evening, I came home to find a small package waiting at my door. No return address, just my name scrawled in Claire's handwriting. Against my better judgment, I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was a small photo album, filled with pictures of us from our time together. Some were from vacations, others from holidays or lazy Sundays at home. Each picture had a note scrawled next to it in Claire's handwriting. Things like, Remember this? Or, we were so happy here. The last page had a picture of us on our wedding day, her face beaming as we exchanged vows. Underneath it, she had written, "We can have this again." I closed the album and tossed it into the trash. The sight of it filled me with a sickening mix of anger and dread. She wasn't just trying to apologize anymore. She was trying to rewrite history, to act like everything could just go back to the way it was. It couldn't, not after what she had done. That night, I finally broke down and told my friend Mark what had been going on. Mark had been one of my closest friends for years, and he had been there for me during the worst of the breakup. He listened intently as I told him about Claire's letters, her visits, and the photo album. "Dude, this sounds like stalking," Mark said, shaking his head. "You need to get a restraining order or something. She's not just some ex who can't let go. She's obsessed." I nodded, knowing he was right. I didn't want to admit it, but Claire's behavior had gone way beyond a typical post-breakup plea for reconciliation. It was turning into something more disturbing. "You think I should call the cops?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Absolutely," Mark said firmly. "This isn't normal, man. She's messing with your head. You've given her plenty of chances to move on, and she's not listening. You need to protect yourself." The idea of calling the police felt extreme, but as the days went by, Claire's behavior continued to spiral. She started showing up at my work. At first, it was just in the parking lot, waiting by her car, watching as I came and went. Then one day, she actually came into the office. It was the middle of the day, and I was sitting at my desk when I saw her walk through the front door. She looked completely out of place in her casual clothes, standing out among the suited professionals moving through the building. My heart sank when I saw her, knowing exactly why she was there. "Jake!" she called, loud enough for everyone around to hear. I froze, my coworkers turning to look at me with curious glances. I stood up slowly and walked toward her, trying to keep my composure. I didn't want to make a scene, but I could feel the tension building in my chest. "What are you doing here, Claire?" I asked quietly, my voice tight. She smiled, completely ignoring my obvious discomfort. "I just wanted to talk. I thought maybe we could grab lunch, catch up a little." "Claire, this is not the time or place," I hissed, trying to keep my voice down. "You need to leave." Her face fell, but she didn't back down. "Jake, please, I miss you. We haven't talked in so long. I just want to fix things." I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on us, the whispers starting to spread. This was the last thing I needed. "Claire, we've been over this. There's nothing to fix. You need to go, now, or I'll have to call security." The calmness she had shown earlier started to crack, her eyes narrowing in frustration. "You're seriously going to throw me out of here?" "I'm your wife, Jake." "Ex-wife," I corrected her. "And yes, I will if I have to." Her expression darkened, and for a moment I thought she might actually cause a scene. But then she stepped back, holding up her hands as if to surrender. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "But this isn't over." She turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my heart racing. My coworkers didn't say anything, but the awkward glances and murmurs were enough to tell me that this wouldn't blow over easily. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the encounter, the way Claire had looked at me like she still had some claim over my life. That evening, I made up my mind. I was going to the police. The next day, I went to the local station and filed a report. I told them everything, about the letters, the visits, the stalking. The officer I spoke to listened carefully, nodding as I explained how Claire's behavior had been escalating over the past few weeks. "You've done the right thing by coming in," the officer said. "We'll issue a formal warning, and if she continues to harass you, we can move forward with a restraining order." It felt strange, sitting there in a police station, talking about my wife, my ex-wife, like she was some kind of threat. But the truth was, she was. She had crossed a line, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. That night I felt a little better. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. I thought maybe the warning would scare her off, make her realize that she needed to back off. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally get the message. But the next morning, I woke up to find a new letter slid under my door. It was short, just a few lines, but the words sent a chill down my spine. "You can try to shut me out, but you can't escape what we had. I'll never stop loving you, Jake. You'll see that one day. I'll be waiting." She had signed it with a heart next to her name, as if this was some kind of love note instead of the ominous warning it felt like. That was when I realized Claire wasn't just obsessed with getting me back. She was obsessed with controlling me, with making sure I never moved on. and I had no idea what she might do next. After finding Claire's latest letter, the realization that she was never going to stop chilled me to the bone. What started as a desperate attempt to win me back had evolved into something far more troubling. Her obsession was no longer just about us or our failed marriage. It was about control, and that terrified me. I tried to go about my life as normally as I could, but Claire was always there, lurking in the background. Every time I thought she had finally given up, she'd find a new way to insert herself into my day. The police had issued their warning, but it didn't seem to faze her. If anything, it emboldened her, like she saw it as a challenge. The day after I received the letter, I decided I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. Claire knew where I lived, and that made it impossible for me to relax. Every sound outside made my heart race. Every creak of the floorboards had me wondering if she had somehow gotten inside. I couldn't live like that. I called Mark and explained the situation. Without hesitation, he offered to let me crash at his place until I figured out my next move. I packed a few bags and left that same night, not even bothering to tell Claire. I wasn't interested in having another confrontation with her. I just wanted to disappear, to put some distance between us. For a while, it seemed like that worked. A couple of weeks passed without any sign of her. I stayed at Mark's place, keeping a low profile, and even managed to get back into the routine of going to work without worrying about running into Claire. She hadn't shown up at my office again, and as far as I could tell, she wasn't following me anymore. For the first time in months, I started to feel like I could breathe again. But the calm didn't last. One night, while I was staying at Mark's, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a picture. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of me, taken through the window of Mark's house. The image was grainy, clearly taken at night, but there was no mistaking it. Claire knew where I was. I immediately showed the text to Mark, who was just as freaked out as I was. "This is insane," he said, pacing the room. "She's not just stalking you, she's spying on you. We need to call the cops again." I agreed, but something inside me told me that even another visit to the police wouldn't stop her. Claire had become more than just persistent. She had become unhinged. Her obsession was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The next morning, I went back to the police station and showed them the text. The officer who took my report was concerned, but it was clear that without any direct threats, there wasn't much they could do besides issue another warning. Still, I filed for a restraining order, hoping that if nothing else, it would give me some legal protection if things got worse. And things did get worse. A few days later, I returned to Mark's after a late shift at work to find the front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed the door open, calling out for Mark. No response. I stepped inside cautiously, scanning the living room for any signs of trouble. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the coffee table, surrounded by Mark's usually cluttered belongings, was an old photo of Claire and me. It was from our honeymoon, back when things were still good, when I thought we were happy. Claire was smiling brightly in the photo, but someone had scratched out my face with what looked like a knife. The frame was cracked, and the glass was shattered. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking. I didn't need to see any more to know that Claire had been there. She had broken into Mark's house and left that photo as a message. She was telling me that no matter where I went, she would find me. I called the police immediately, and within minutes they were at the house, taking statements and dusting for fingerprints. But Claire was long gone by the time they arrived. They assured me they'd look into it, but I could tell from their tone that they didn't expect to find her anytime soon. Mark was livid when he got home and saw the mess. "This is insane, Jake. She's crossing every line. You can't stay here anymore. It's not safe." I nodded, agreeing with him completely. But where could I go? Claire had already found me once. She could do it again, no matter where I hid. It felt like I was running out of options. The police suggested installing security cameras and changing my routine to make it harder for Claire to track me. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Claire wasn't just stalking me anymore. She was toying with me, trying to wear me down, mentally and emotionally. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what Claire was truly capable of. She had already broken into Mark's house, already sent threatening messages. What was stopping her from going even further? And then I thought of something worse. What if she wasn't just after me? What if she started targeting the people I cared about? Mark, my family. Claire was unpredictable now, and that made her dangerous. I had to stop her before things escalated any further. But how? I couldn't stay at Mark's anymore. Not after what Claire had done. The realization that she had broken into his home, left that chilling photo, and was still somehow keeping tabs on me sent a cold wave of fear through my entire body. It wasn't just my life that was at risk anymore. Anyone close to me was a potential target. I moved out the next day, crashing at a cheap motel on the other side of town, trying to stay off Claire's radar. Mark was supportive, but I could tell he was worried. Not just for me, but for himself. We both knew that Claire had crossed a dangerous line, and there was no telling how far she was willing to go. I left without telling anyone where I was staying, hoping that putting some distance between us would at least buy me some time. A few days passed in relative silence. Claire didn't show up. There were no letters, no cryptic texts, no signs that she had found me again. I thought maybe, just maybe, she had finally realized how far she'd gone and decided to back off. But then, like clockwork, Claire resurfaced. Only this time, she took things to an even more disturbing level. It started with a phone call from my sister Sarah. She and I weren't super close, but we kept in touch regularly. When her name appeared on my phone, I hesitated for a second, wondering if it was about Claire. I answered, bracing myself. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" Sarah's voice was sharp, laced with concern. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart already racing. "Claire showed up at Mom and Dad's house. She told them you're having some kind of breakdown, that you're in trouble, and that you've been pushing everyone away. She's worried about you, Jake. At least that's what she told them." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "She went to see Mom and Dad?" "Yeah," Sarah continued. "She sat with them for almost 2 hours, telling them all about how you've been distant and erratic. Mom called me afterward, completely freaked out. 'They're worried sick about you, Jake.' I didn't believe her, obviously, but Mom, you know how she is. She's convinced something's wrong with you." I slammed my fist against the motel's cheap desk, fury building in my chest. Claire wasn't just stalking me now. She was manipulating my family, planting doubts in their heads, making them think I was the problem. "Did you tell them about the divorce? About what she's been doing?" I tried, but Claire already had them wrapped around her finger. "You know how charming she can be when she wants to. Mom even asked if I'd seen you lately, to check if everything was okay." My mind was spinning. Claire had taken things to a whole new level, pulling my family into her twisted game. This wasn't about getting me back anymore. It was about controlling the narrative. She was making it look like I was the one who had lost control, like I was the one who needed help. "Sarah, I need you to talk to them," I said, my voice tight. "Tell them everything. The letters, the stalking, the break-in at Mark's place. They need to know that Claire's dangerous." "I will," Sarah said. "But you need to tell them too, Jake. They're not going to believe me unless it comes from you." I hung up, feeling completely cornered. Claire was systematically dismantling my life, cutting off my support system piece by piece. If I didn't act fast, she was going to make sure I was completely isolated. And once that happened, who knew what she'd do next? I drove over to my parents' house that night, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming. When I arrived, Mom greeted me at the door, her face creased with worry. "Jake, honey, what's going on?" "Claire's been so worried about you," she said, pulling me into a hug. The anger bubbled up inside me again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed them to see the truth, not to think I was being irrational. "Mom, we need to talk." We sat down in the living room and I told them everything. The affair, the divorce, the stalking, the break-ins. I showed them the texts, the letters, explained how Claire had been following me, manipulating me. At first, they listened quietly, but as I spoke, I could see the doubt flickering in their eyes. Claire had already poisoned the well, and it was going to take a lot more than my word to convince them. When I finished, my dad was the first to speak. "Jake, this is all pretty serious stuff. Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding? Maybe Claire's just trying to reach out because she's worried." "No, Dad," I snapped, more forcefully than I intended. "This isn't some cry for help. She's trying to ruin me. She's been stalking me for weeks, breaking into places I stay, leaving creepy notes. She's not worried. She's obsessed." My mom exchanged a look with my dad, clearly unsettled. "Honey, I don't know. I mean, Claire came here. She seemed so upset. She's been going to therapy, trying to work on herself. Maybe you two just need to sit down and talk." I stood up abruptly, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You don't get it, do you? She's not trying to fix anything. She's manipulating you, just like she manipulated me. You can't let her fool you into thinking she's the victim here." My mom flinched at my outburst, but my dad was still skeptical. Jake, I think maybe you should take a step back from all of this. You're clearly stressed out. I'm not stressed out. I'm being stalked. The conversation went in circles after that. No matter what I said, no matter how much evidence I provided, my parents couldn't fully shake the idea that Claire was just a concerned ex-wife trying to repair the damage. It was infuriating, but Claire had gotten to them first, and that made her story stick. I left their house feeling even more alone than before. My family didn't believe me. Claire had turned them against me, and now I was on my own. The police hadn't been much help, and my friends couldn't protect me from her relentless obsession. Everywhere I turned, it felt like she was winning, slowly tightening the noose around my life. That night, I sat in my car for hours, trying to figure out what to do next. If the police couldn't help, if my family didn't believe me, what other options did I have? I couldn't just keep running from her. Claire wasn't going to stop until she had completely destroyed everything I had. But as I stared out into the empty parking lot, one thing became painfully clear. I wasn't just dealing with the Claire I had once loved. This wasn't about fixing our marriage. Claire had become something else, someone else. And if I didn't find a way to stop her, she was going to ruin me, or worse. The drive back to the motel was a blur, my mind racing with every possible scenario. I couldn't get past the fact that Claire had successfully manipulated my family, turning the people who knew me best against me. It felt like she had anticipated every move, stayed one step ahead, and now I was left with no one to rely on but myself. I knew this couldn't continue. It had already gone too far. The next day, I made another attempt to escalate things with the police. I went back to the station, determined to push harder for a restraining order and more serious action against Claire. I laid out everything, showed them the texts, the picture she took through Mark's window, and told them about the break-in. I could see the officer I was talking to growing more concerned, but still, without any direct threats, the law wasn't entirely on my side. "We can file for the restraining order," the officer said, leaning back in his chair. "But understand, until she's served or does something more extreme, it's tough to enforce. I get it, you're in a bad spot. But these things take time. Time. That's the one thing I didn't have. With Claire's behavior escalating, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. If she wasn't going to back off, I needed to find a way to protect myself. I decided then that I had to confront her, one last time, and make it clear that this had to end. That evening, I drove by Claire's apartment, planning to confront her on neutral ground. I parked outside, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the courage to go up and talk to her. But as I sat there staring at her front door, I hesitated. What if confronting her made things worse? What if she took it as another challenge? What if she became violent? Before I could decide, I saw a figure walking down the street. Claire. She was alone, her head down, walking toward her building. A rush of adrenaline surged through me, and without thinking, I got out of the car and followed her. "Claire!" I called out. She froze, turning slowly to face me. Her expression flickered between surprise and something else, something darker. For a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved, the woman who used to laugh with me, share my life. But that woman was gone. The person standing in front of me was a stranger. "Jake," she said, her voice smooth, almost eerily calm. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I closed the distance between us, keeping my voice steady. "You need to stop, Claire. This has to end. The stalking, the manipulation, it's over." She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. "I'm not stalking you, Jake. I'm just trying to remind you of what we had. We were happy once. We can be again." I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside me. "We can't, Claire. What we had is gone. It's been gone ever since you cheated. You destroyed everything, and you can't undo that." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "I didn't destroy anything. You're the one who walked away. You're the one who gave up on us." My patience was wearing thin. "No, Claire. You gave up the moment you chose someone else over me. You've been harassing me for weeks, stalking me, and now you've dragged my family into this. It's over." Her expression hardened, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. But instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she stepped closer to me. "You think you can just walk away from me? After everything we've been through? After all I've done for you?" I stepped back, the intensity in her voice catching me off guard. "Claire, this isn't love. This is control, and I won't let you keep doing this, she laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You don't get it, do you? You belong to me, Jake. We belong to each other. I'm not going to let you throw that away. I stared at her, a sinking feeling growing in my gut. This wasn't just about a failed marriage anymore. Claire had become delusional, convinced that she could somehow force me to come back to her. I realized then that I couldn't reason with her. There was no getting through to someone who had already convinced themselves that reality didn't apply. I turned to leave, my hand already reaching for my phone to call the police again. But before I could take more than a few steps, Claire grabbed my arm, yanking me back toward her. Her grip was tight, her eyes wide with a mix of desperation and fury. You're not leaving me, she hissed, her voice low and menacing. Let go of me, Claire, I said through gritted teeth, trying to pull my arm free. But she held on, her nails digging into my skin. I'm not going to let you ruin this, Jake. We can fix it. We will fix it. I finally wrenched my arm away, stepping back as I stared at her in disbelief. This is insane. You're not thinking clearly. Claire's eyes were wild now, her breathing heavy. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, Jake. You just don't see it yet, but you will. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I turned and walked away, not looking back, my mind racing as I headed back to my car. As soon as I was inside, I locked the doors and called the police again. This time I told them everything. How Claire had grabbed me, how she was refusing to let go. I didn't know if they'd do anything, but I couldn't take any more chances. The police arrived at Claire's apartment a short while later, and though I couldn't hear the conversation, I saw them talking to her from a distance. She was calm, composed, even smiling as she spoke to the officers. When they left, Claire didn't look my way, but I could feel the weight of her gaze on me. I knew this wasn't the end. Claire wasn't going to give up, but I had to find a way to protect myself before she escalated even further. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Claire. You can run, but you can't hide. We're not done. A chill ran down my spine. I had no idea how far she would go, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over yet. Claire's message haunted me for days. You can run, but you can't hide. We're not done. It played on a loop in my head, a chilling reminder that she was still out there, lurking, waiting to strike. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. I was trapped, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting Claire to appear at any moment. The police hadn't been able to do much beyond issuing another warning. And even though I had filed for a restraining order, I knew it would take time for everything to be processed. Time was something I didn't have. Claire had proven that she wouldn't stop, and the thought of her doing something even more extreme kept me awake at night. I barely left the motel, and when I did, I was always on edge. I avoided seeing my family and friends, terrified that Claire might use them to get to me again. My world had shrunk down to the size of this dingy room, and I felt more alone than ever. I couldn't live like this, constantly running, hiding, waiting for the next move in a twisted game I never wanted to play. Then one night, everything came to a head. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning, when I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. It was late, too late for anyone to be visiting. My first thought was Claire, and I immediately reached for my phone to call the police. But then I hesitated, wondering if I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just the motel staff or someone at the wrong door. Another knock, louder this time. I crept toward the door, my pulse racing, and peeked through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Claire. She stood there, her face partially hidden by the dim lighting of the hallway, but I could see enough to know it was her. She looked calm, almost serene, as if this were just a casual visit, like we were still married, and she had just come home after a long day. For a moment I froze. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to throw the door open and demand to know what the hell she was doing here, but another part of me, probably the smarter part, knew that confronting her would only make things worse. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. I didn't want her to know I was there, didn't want her to know I had seen her. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver that my ex-wife was at my door and I needed help. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but those few minutes felt like an eternity. Claire knocked again, a soft, almost polite knock, like she was just waiting for me to invite her in. I stayed as still as I could, my back pressed against the wall, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I prayed she would leave, but I knew better. Claire wasn't going anywhere. She was determined, relentless. Finally, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Claire must have heard them too because the knocking stopped. A moment later, the police knocked on the door, calling out my name. I rushed to open it, relief flooding through me when I saw the officer standing there. But when I stepped into the hallway, Claire was gone. The spot where she had been standing was empty, like she had vanished into thin air. I explained everything to the officers, my voice shaking as I told them about her, knocking on the door. They searched the area, checked the security cameras, but it was like she had disappeared. No one had seen her leave, and there was no trace of her in the motel or the surrounding area. It didn't make sense. She had been right there, but now it was like she had never existed. The officers assured me they would keep an eye out for her and told me to stay inside and lock the door. They promised to patrol the area for the rest of the night, but I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I stayed awake the entire night, waiting for another knock, another sign that Claire was out there. But nothing happened. The night passed in eerie silence, and when the sun finally rose, I was left feeling more shaken than ever. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly running from her shadow. The restraining order was in process, but I knew Claire wasn't going to stop unless something drastic happened. I had to face the reality that I was no longer safe. Not here, not anywhere that Claire could find me. The next morning, I made a decision. I packed up my things, checked out of the motel, and drove out of town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my family, not Mark, not even the police. The fewer people who knew, the better. I needed to disappear for a while, to go somewhere Claire couldn't reach me. I found a small, quiet town a few hours away and rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from everything that I felt like I could finally breathe. No one knew me here, and more importantly, Claire didn't know where I was. I turned off my phone, cut off all contact, and tried to rebuild some semblance of peace in the solitude. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. The world was quiet, and I could finally think without the constant fear of Claire's presence looming over me. But that peace was fleeting. A week after I had settled into the cabin, I woke up one morning to find something on the doorstep. It was a single piece of paper, folded neatly in half. My heart sank as I picked it up, already knowing what it was. Unfolding it, I saw Claire's handwriting scrawled across the page, in bold, confident strokes. "You can run, but you can't hide. I told you, we're not done." The note slipped from my fingers as a cold wave of terror washed over me. No matter where I went, no matter how far I tried to escape, Claire would always find me. She had made that perfectly clear. This wasn't over, and deep down, I knew. Maybe it never would be.